And welcome to our last video on loops. This is the third video on loops, and this time we're going to be tackling the while loop. Now, the while loop seems to be the most popular loop. It is a pre-test loop. It's a guarded loop, so it tests everything before the code inside is run. There is a test to make sure that this code is going to work or is needed, is necessary. Then the code is actually run, and at the end of that code, before the thing is done again, it's tested before it runs. So because it is a guarded loop or a pre-test loop, it seems to be the most popular or the most used form of loop, but it also has a couple of issues. Now, as our program here, the notes here that I have for you show, we test the while condition, and then we use our do keyword before we actually run our code in a begin and end brick. So this is actually encapsulated itself. It's broken into its own little brick of code, and that allows us to use the break command line command word, which I know I haven't talked about yet, but I will be doing in this particular video. So this is a simple little way of using the loop that you have in your notes. But let's put one together. We actually start with the random number generator we did in our last loop, where we used our until loop, repeat until loop. In this particular code, we generate a random number, then we ask the user to enter that random number, and we tell them if it's correct or not. That's our little piece of simple pseudocode, and we've done this in the last video. But what you may not realize is this is also the way that computer games work for their combat phases. Now, when I say combat, I'm using a generalized term there. I'm not just talking about hammers and swords on shields. I'm talking about any time the user and an NPC or a user and an NPC is actually interacting. What you're effectively doing is striking a known number that the user has, be it one of their stats or a way that they might choose to do something, against the NPC's randomly generated number. Now, the user, if you think about a classic sword-on-sword fight, chink, chink, when the NPC attacks, bang, that NPC will attack with a randomly generated number that will be within a certain range of its strength and agility and ability to actually hit your shield. When you return, there is usually some sort of skill involved or some sort of choice by the user to determine how much of that attack is going to hit your opponent back. So this is actually a good place for us to start with, and we can do that on a new Word document, Word being the smart one. So we're going to write some pseudocode for a simple little way that the user will attack an enemy and run a little simple combat phase using a while loop. So we start out with our start. And in this case, we're actually going to have to define some variables. We haven't defined variables in pseudocode up to now, but we're actually going to have to define a couple of variables because we need to know if we have struck enough on our enemy or if our enemy has struck enough on us. So we call these health mechanics in games programming. So we're actually going to define a variables, and we're not going to give them a type, right? Pseudocode, not coding. We don't know if these are going to be typed or not. We're not going to actually give them a type in our pseudocode. So we're going to define variables, and I'm going to call one user health and enemy health. So we have defined two variables, the user health and the enemy health. And in here, we're actually going to give them default values. So we're going to say that this is going to be 100 for each. We're going to set the health of each of these to be 100. Now, again, it doesn't matter what the actual variable type is there, It could be a simple integer, but if we're thinking about this as a simple percentage, then if you take the EVE Online game, for example, that I've been playing a little bit of recently, my battleship in EVE Online has 150,000 health points. So my 100% health might actually have to be represented as a long integer in the C++ coding that they write with. If you do the flip side, for example, and we have a simple little user generated game, that might only need 10 health, but 100% of that is still worth the value of 10 points. So we're defining our two variables here to have 100% health. And if you really want to, you could put the percentage point in there. That's not a big issue. I don't have a problem with that, but that's how we are thinking about these variables. So after we define our variables, we need to look at what we actually want to do. So we're going to need to generate a random number, but we're going to need to do that inside of our loop. So how are we going to structure our loop? Well, let's say this is going to be a simple duel to the death. This is going to be a simple duel until one of our two characters does not have any health left. So we will be using a while loop because we want to test this each time we go through. So while user health, and we put this in brackets because we want to, you remember that we are doing a form of mathematics here. So it's okay to put brackets in here because we're doing a form of mathematics where we're breaking up our maths into at different points. Here, the brackets will be decided first. So if the user health is greater than, is that the right way? Greater than 0, and now, and is a keyword because we are making a decision. We're going to keep looping through this while our enemy health is also greater than 0. Then we're going to have this particular thing going. So what's going to happen in our code? How are we going to strike these two? How are we going to have this happen? Well, the first thing we're going to have is the user. We will ask the user to enter a number. That's the first thing that's going to happen. The user is going to put a number in. Then we're going to generate a random number. Now, let's say that we're going to say if one of these numbers is greater than the other, right? We're going to do a simple little mechanic that if I hit you harder than you try to hit me or harder than your shield is, then you lose some points. So if user number is greater than random number, then the enemy will lose a certain amount of health. So if I strike you, whack, and I hit you harder than you have strength for, my number that I generate with my sword coming down is stronger than your shield is, then let's say we make it nice and simple. Enemy health is reduced by 25%. Again, we're not putting in the programming language here. We're just using simple language. The enemy health is reduced by 25%. In this case, we can say else. In the other case, well, actually, we have three cases here because we have if the one hits the other, bigger, harder than that. If the other hits the one harder than that, so if I hit you harder than that, or if you hit me harder than that, then we've got a third case where we hit each other at the same amount. So we're going to actually have to not use our else statement here. We're going to have to do a whole new if statement. If random number is greater than user number, then our health will have to be reduced by 25%. You follow how I'm doing this? So if my strike against you is stronger than your shield or stronger than the ability that you have to withstand it, then your health is reduced 25%. If your strike against me is stronger than my ability to withstand it, then my health is reduced 25%. If they're the same, we can ignore it. We'll just ignore the strike. So that's a nice, easy little way for us to do that. Now, before we close the loop, we want to be able to display back to the user what their health is. So in here, where we actually have our strikes, we want to be able to know who's doing what damage. So we can add in here a line, write something like your hit told. So we're going to tell the user your hit was the more powerful one. Otherwise, we're going to tell the user you took damage. Now, in our code here, we want to be able to know what the health is at the end of these strikes. So before we go back and end, we want to actually know what our healths are. So we can simply write to the user, your health, your health is, and we will add the user health, and we will write to the user enemy health is, and enemy health. So we have a nice little simple program that will tell us what we are going to use. Now, at the bottom here, we will want to put in a keyword to be able to tell us when our loop is finished. So we will put loop, just so that we know how far the loop is going to go. But after we have finished our loop, we want to know who wins and who loses. So now we can say if we're going to ask a question, and we know one of these is going to be going down to 0. So because we've got this by 25%, it's going to be asking if it's above 0. At a certain point, one of these will end up being 0. Now, do we want to limit ourselves to just asking one question? I think for now it's okay to just say if the user health equals 0, then we will tell the user you lost. And we will write that to the user. And we can put our else in here, else we know that we will be writing you won. Nice and simple. And that ends our program. So this is outside of our loop. This will be only run once. So our loop will start. So when we start at the beginning, we're going to define our variables. We've got 2 variables here, and they are percentages. They're not numbered. They're not typed. They haven't gone into any coding here. We've got a while the user health and the enemy health are greater than 0. So as we go through this, if the enemy health drops below 0 or drops to 0, if it actually hits 0, one of these we will end our loop. While both of these are greater than 0, we ask the user to enter a number. We generate a random number. And then if the user number is greater than the random number, if the user's attack is stronger than the random number's defense, then we'll write your hit told. If the random number is greater than the user number, if the other guy's hit was harder, then you took damage. And we will tell what the healths are at the end. We don't really want to know what the random numbers are. That's none of our business. We don't need to think about that mechanic. We just need to know what our healths are at the end of each loop. So let's open up our code and let's get trying. So we open our program. And we're going to call this while loops. And we use a CRT to be able to bring that in. And now we have our variables. VAR. Now, with our variables here, because of our, I'll put a 0 there. Because of our coding, we know, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 done this before, that we will not just need these 2, user health and enemy health, which I will copy and simply paste in. We also are going to need 2 other variables called user number and random number. So user number and random number. Now, in terms of type, once again, we can easily get away with making these integers. I know I've done everything in integers here, but I'm only explaining to you how these functions work. I'm not leaving it up to you guys to go and process and try these out with different types of integers. When it comes to your assessments, you will need, and I stress will need, to use other types of variables. But I can leave that up to you to work out on your own. So we have our 4 variables that we're going to need, and we will begin our software. And when we begin our software, the first thing that we're going to want, if we look back, is we're going to have to define our healths. So the first thing we will do here is we will define user health as equals 100. And we will define enemy health equals, 100. And that is set at the beginning of our program. So that's the only time we are going to actually set our user health and our enemy health. We don't need to think about them being defined after this. Now, for our loop, we go straight into our loop. So our loop will be a while loop, which, if we go back to our notes over here, is a simple while such and such is less than or equal to such and such. So while user health is greater than 0, do something. But we actually have two functions in here. We have two different variables, two different conditions, excuse me, that we are using in this particular program. How do we write them in our Pascal? Well, we put brackets around them. The same as we have done in our pseudocode, we simply put brackets around them and we ask the question and. We're asking if this thing and this thing is true. So we're stepping away from just our standard if statement where we have one condition, or our standard loop statement where we have one repeat statement where we have one condition. Now we're going to have this condition and this condition. We can also, if we want to, we can use the or. If this one or this one was greater than 0. We can do that because we may sometimes want to have limited different functionality or different limited, conditions that we want to end our loop on. So for now, we're just going to have user health is greater than 0 and enemy health is greater than 0. So while our user health is greater than 0 and our enemy health is greater than 0, we're going to do something. And if we look back in our notes, we see that we have to put a begin and end block. We have to encapsulate this particular piece of code. So we're going to put begin. We're actually going to put it as begin and not begin. We're not beginning the begin. We're going to put a begin and we're going to put an end. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is where we will put our marker. And just so that we can make sure that everything is nice and tidy, I'm also going to put my end block here with a full stop. That's just the way that I like to code, because that means that I know that bottom bit so that I can run and test things as I go. So I know that my begins and ends are already written in. So where are we going here? The first thing we're going to do is we're asking the user to enter a number. So we will write line. Hello, puppy. Come here. Come here. Darcy, this is year 11. Year 11, this is Darcy. Hello, Darcy. Darcy shouldn't be in here with me, but he is. So he's saying hello to everybody. Now he's going away. Go, go, go. So we are writing a line. Please enter a number. And then we will read line. And we will read in whatever the user number is. Now we are going to enter. Now, we haven't decided what our numbers are going to be, but we're going to actually expand this out. So we're going to enter a number between 0 and 100. We're going to make this a little bit bigger than we did last time. So we ask the user to please enter a number between 0 and 100, and we are then going to build a random number. Now, this is again in our loop, so the first thing that we'll do is we'll ask the user to bring it in, and it's important that we follow our steps. Here we ask the user to generate a random number first, then we generate our random number. So our random number in here is equal to random, and we are passing it the number 100. So we're asking it for a number between 0 and 100, making sure I've got all the semicolons. Yep. Now we're asking our if statements. If our user number is greater than our random number, then what do we want to have happen? We want to write your hit told, and we're going to reduce the enemy strength by 25. So if the user number is greater than the random number, we're going to write line. Oh, we need our, that's right, we need to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, begin and end. And because we're only doing single if statements, we can put a space there. So we begin and end, and we are going to write line. Your shot told. Oops. Single inverted commas, not doubles. And we are going to take enemy health, and it's going to equal, it's going to be assigned to enemy health minus 25. So now we have taken 25% off for each hit. So that's our first if statement, and now we just need to reverse these for our second if statement. So if random number is greater than user number, oops, then begin right line and we will put you took damage. Our user health is equal to or is assigned to user health minus 25. And we will end this if statement there. So we're up to this point now. So now we have written in that we have put if our user hits harder or our random number hits harder. Now at the bottom of this, and you'll notice I'm putting some white space and a few things like that in, we need to write back to the user. Whoops. Your health is, and remember our space before our closed inverted comma, and user health, close brackets and that, and we'll write in the same for our random health, our NPC's health, enemy semicolon, and that should be the end where we will have our loop. Now we've already ended our loop. Our begin and our end for our loop are there, so that's already right. We don't need to think about that too much, but we do need to think about this little bit. So if the user health is greater than 0, so now we have a if statement outside of our loop. Notice that our loops begins here and ends here, and that's because we can see very, very clearly where things are. So if our user health is greater than 0, then actually if the user health is 0, we will, now we don't need to put a begin and end here because we're only doing one line. So right line, you lost. Now, remember with our if statements that if we are only having one line in our if statements, we don't put a semicolon on the end. We do not put a semicolon on the end because that throws errors. And so we have our right line set up there, else, and we will right line, you won. We do put our semicolon there. So let's give this a try. That looks pretty right to me. We will save it again. We're going to, oops, I didn't save it at the beginning. How silly of me. See, that's supposed to be the first thing you do. Yeah, even the smart ones make mistakes. While loop, save, and let's give it a run. Whoop, we have a problem here. Random number equals random 100. Ooh, what's the issue there? This is interesting. I'm going to pause this for a second. Now, I see what I've done wrong here. So I didn't put a full colon there. And I also, down here, I put a D instead of an N. If you look down here, you can actually see illegal expression because I didn't properly assign it. And here, right LD is not recognized. Now this should work a little bit better. So let's try it now. Good. Now we compiled. I worked out what my screen is doing here. This is actually my AVG trying to catch any errors. So I can close that one. That's why it closes so quickly. It runs the program while I'm trying it. So this time it will actually run. So now we will enter a number between 0 and 100. Let's go 25. You took damage. Your health is 75 and the enemy health is 100. So let's go with 91. Your hit told my number was greater. So now we're at 75 and 75. Let's go 25 again. Took damage again. All right, let's try and keep our numbers high. 68. No, that didn't work. 99. Oh, okay, good. Right, so I'm getting him back. 11. Oh, why'd it close? I know where it closed because I didn't put a read line right at the end. I missed the basic thing that we do with all of our programs so that we can actually see if they work. See, we all make mistakes. That's okay. That's part of programming. Read line there just so that it won't just close on us all through. So let's give this one more try. We can go away with ABG. All right, let's give this another go. So it's compiling, and here we go. So 25. I took damage. 25 again. I'm going to stick with 25. It's not working for me. I lost. So there you have it right at the end there. You lost. That's how the number ends. What we would probably want to do here is we'd probably want to put in a couple of right lines just to be able to make it a little bit clearer, so that we can work our see how where our code actually rides. But that's okay. We've got that nice and working. So this is how our program will work using a while loop. But there's something that we've missed here as well. We could keep this fight going as long as we really wanted to. We actually could keep this fight going for quite a bit of time if we wanted to just assign that, let's say the player was quite gruesome, or let's say we're not fighting a person, we're actually trying to beat down a building. Let's say we've got a very large building, we want to keep beating it down, but after a while, even a building with a huge amount of health, if you knock all the struts out, you might have only damaged 10% of the building, but that building's going to fall over. So let's say we want to actually change this to be a counter. We're going to actually count the number of rounds we have, but we're going to break it when one of their healths come to 0. So now we're going to allow you to count a certain number of times that we're going to loop this. We're going to use a counter loop that we're actually going to break out when we want to get to that point. How would we do that? Well, that's not so difficult. What we need to do here is we come back up to the top to our variables. We're going to add one more variable. We're going to call it counter. So we're adding a counter variable in here. And now we're going to go in and we're going to put our counter code in the same as we have with our for loop before. So for, we're going to have our counter is set originally to be 1. And then we're going to make it go until we hit 100. We're going to give it a maximum of 100 smashes. We're going to have 100 hits on this thing, no more, no less. So this is our counter setup. And if we run this, we will be able to run our program. But the problem is there is never a chance of us actually getting out of our loop at this point. If you see, I've taken, 225, 275, 300 damage. I took 275 damage before I won another round. That's not good. So what we want to do, I was just running that on the AVG version. So what we want to do is we need to actually break out of this loop when something happens. So let's go in here into our if statements, and we're going to add a command line break. Oops, it's a command, so we put it in all caps. So we can actually add the command break, and that will break us out of the loop. Now, what we can do, because we're no longer having the user actually physically put a number in, we can change our read line to define our user number as another random number. So now our user number can be simply another random number from 0 to 100. And now we can see if we'll be able to win before the other guy. So let's give that a try in our real version. You took damage and you won. Well, that didn't come up very well. Why not? It didn't, because we simply said if we take damage, then we break. So we put our things here actually inside the if statements in here. We have to move this bit up a little bit, and we're going to have to split this into 2 if statements. So what we're actually going to have to do is move this into the bottom of our loop. Now that's going to be a little bit tricky for us to do, although we can easily do it by just dragging that up nicely. And we can add our spaces in front of this code. But now we have to be delicate about how we put this on, because we will have to add in here, and we're going to have to add in here a second if statement as well, because we're going to have to ask if the user health, so we can use an else if statement, which is what we'll do here. So if the user health is 0, then begin, and we're going to firstly write line you lost. Then we are going to, now we're going to have to add our semicolon at the end here, because it'll be our end. That will be the one that will not have a semicolon, so we add that in. Then we will add our break from here into the bottom under there. So now it will only break if we hit 0 on one of our commands. It won't break just because someone took a strike. I'm going to add those right lines in this bit as well. So now, if the user health hits 0, then we will have 2 spare lines and it will say you lost. Else, if I'm going to have enemy health is 0, then begin here. We'll add our 2 right lines in, U1, and then we will break and end as well. And we put a semicolon for this one. Now, what we have done is we've allowed this to go through, but this will only be called, if you can see, when the condition is met. So it'll only be called when the user health is 0 or when the enemy health is 0. And this being an else statement, actually, I don't think, yes, we do need that one there. That's fine. So now let's run this. Yep. So even our AVG version works, but we don't want to look at that. We want to look at the primary version. Right, so enter a number between 0 and 100. You took damage, you took damage, you took damage. So even the automatic number system isn't working well for us, and we keep taking damage and we lose. And that's it. So now we have built this into our little break program. This is really rather useful because in the next lecture, the last video that I'm going to make on Pascal for now, although if you have some particular questions, please feel free to ask and I can make videos for them specifically. But in the next video, I'm going to teach you about what we call encapsulation. Encapsulation is where we have these pieces of code that are built into other pieces of code that we can easily take out and we can put somewhere else. So for now, I'll have this one uploaded in a few minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or to post up on the Google Classroom. Thank you very much for watching.